What's up, everybody? It's your boy Ryan, and this is the Thunder Channel on nootropics, on testosterone, and on performance. I'm your host, Ryan Michael Ballo. Subscribe to the channel if you haven't. Turn on notifications. Get the YouTube app to get notified in real time. This broadcast is supported by a couple products, which I'll explain later, but super quickly. Number one, the Cortex Stack. Number two, the Torque Stack. And then lastly, if you need to hire me for biohacking consulting, you can do that at livecortex.com. All right, so right into it. You may already follow, or you may have heard of it. If you didn't, you certainly should follow this guy's channel. A guy named David De La Morenas, YouTuber that has a channel called How to Beast. And, he talks about all manner of things, but mostly it's kind of like self-improvement related stuff for men, a little bit of business here and there. I think he talks about dating and a host of other things. It's actually a great channel for men to follow. So this guy, David, did a video recently on TRT. Turns out he's been on TRT for 4 years or so. And, he's done periodic videos about his experience on TRT. And his latest one was 4 years on TRT. This is what I've noticed, where basically he ends up upping his dose, changing the dose, and explaining a whole host of things, which I want to break down on this video because it's all relevant to us here. For men that are thinking about getting on TRT, as well as guys that already are on TRT, because there's a lot of nuances that I'm going to break down from the biohacking perspective that should help a lot of people. All right, so let's get right into it.
Man, it is crazy to think it's been almost 4 years since I started my TRT journey. It was back right around my 30th birthday that I went in and got my levels tested, and the results came back a bit below average test for my age. And it didn't really surprise me because in my late 20s, I'd started noticing that I was not recovering as quickly from my workouts. I was feeling a bit more fatigued all the time. And this was the same time my life was getting busier than ever. YouTube grinded up to 1 million subscribers. We had just launched Edge and some other businesses. And that's when I made the difficult decision to start TRT, partly to see if it would alleviate these symptoms, but partly also, if I'm being honest, to document it on YouTube. Because at the time, no one was being honest about this stuff. I think Brandon Harding was the only one who had come out and been open about his gear use. And also, I'd been lifting naturally for about 8 or 9 years. I felt like I had basically maxed out my genetic potential, and I was curious to see if I got doctor prescribed TRT with regular blood work, could I increase my physique to the next level? So I got started, and about 6 months in, I'd seen some pretty drastic changes to my physique. It looked like I put on about 5 to 10 pounds of mass. It was almost like I had experienced newbie gains again. But then after that 6 months, things kind of leveled out, like my body had adjusted to that new test level.
All right, so let's just stop there for a second, and then we'll go back to the video. There's a couple things that he said there that I want to touch on. Number one, he maxed out his genetic potential. So there is such a thing that, look, unless you're pushing 1,000 plus nanograms per deciliter and high levels of free testosterone, there is a limitation on how much muscle you can build. I mean, this is why some guys go on anabolic androgenic steroids or take their TRT doses very high to kind of like testosterone cycle territory, which is like 200 milligrams or above. There is a max kind of genetic potential that you reach on your natural levels of testosterone. This is absolutely true. The other thing that he mentioned was recovery was, perhaps a little subpar, maybe plateaued. And that's absolutely a real thing. Like with your genetic potential for natural testosterone, your recovery, it basically has a certain max point. And then, but alternatively, when you get on TRT, it noticeably changes the game. You can lift more, you can go to the gym more, you can work out harder, and you will recover faster. For most folks, they're going to feel a lot better. And part of, aside from the muscle protein synthesis and a host of other things, the reason people are able to build solid muscle on TRT is just because they can recover faster, which allows them to go to the gym more and push harder. All right, so back to the video.
Had more energy, I was recovering faster, and my sex drive, which wasn't a problem before TRT, it got a bit intense, if I'm being honest.
All right, so let's couch it there. That's one thing that definitely happens. Now, look, not all guys that get on TRT are going to have immediate increases in sex drive because there's a lot of things that sort of go into that. I mean, this heavily depends on your numbers being as perfect as possible, both in terms of total T and free T, but in terms of estradiol and prolactin as well. But if you've been starved of androgens for a considerable period of time and you're getting on TRT from being at 300 or 400 nanograms per deciliter total test, which is, just above the reference range and somewhat near hypogonadism, gonadal, yeah, then it may take some time for you to notice sex drive increases. But for most guys, if the dose is right, the frequency is right, the injection type is right for them, because it seems to be different for different people based on their goals and their physiology, then yeah, I mean, you should notice a markedly noticeable increase in libido, probably erection quality for a lot of guys, feeling like they did when they were a teenager. All right, let's continue.
Maybe it was a bit too much. But something that's interesting to me is the size I am seems to be dependent on the dose. And a lot of people say, oh, you can run cycles and then just cruise on TRT to maintain all those gains you've made. And I'm not sure that's true from my experience.
All right, so what he's saying there, and this is a good point that I want to make. The size that you are able to achieve in terms of your physique, like your actual size, which translates to basically your muscle size. As far as TRT goes, that is somewhat dependent, or I should say largely dependent on your dose, but ultimately translates to what your total test, but more importantly, your free testosterone numbers get to. Some of you remember, I think it was 8 months ago or something, I went on an HCG cycle, it's human chorionic gonadotropin. I was injecting it subcutaneously in my belly fat every other day. I was somewhat high dosing it, and I took my total testosterone to 1250, and my free testosterone was either right below the reference range, top of the reference range, or over the top of the reference range. And yeah, I got bigger. And so, in fact, some people thought I was on testosterone like 8 months ago or something. It was actually just HCG, because when you take your testosterone levels past 1,000 even, but especially you get them up to 1250 and you're lifting heavy weights, look, I mean, you've got increased muscle protein synthesis, you recover faster, you put more time in the gym, and you can get significant size relatively quickly. All right, so let's continue.
Because Reddy, I started at 200 milligrams per week, but then slowly I actually lowered my dose down to 100 milligrams per week, which is half of that. And this is partly because I optimized my protocol. I switched from 1 injection to week to doing every other day. That seemed to raise my overall levels. Then I switched from injecting into my belly fat into intramuscular in my ventroglute. That seemed to improve the efficiency at which my body uptook the testosterone. Also, I started Finasteride.
So let's quick touch on his dose changes and kind of some of the things that he just mentioned, which I think are important. Yeah, look, dose, frequency, and manipulation does ultimately change how your body reacts to testosterone. If you're injecting every day, which is something that's somewhat new on the scene and has a little bit of research, but frankly not a lot behind it, then your serum testosterone levels, as well as your estrogen levels, are going to be more stable. So they'll sort of be at a certain number kind of consistently, which is good for some people, but it's not good for other people. In addition, though, and I'm not sure if you can call this pharmacodynamics, when you inject testosterone into your subcutaneous tissue, like your skin, but without hitting the muscle, well, then it uptakes differently. There's also aromatase enzymes in your fat tissue, and potentially that could convert some of that testosterone in a higher quantity to estradiol, which may be fine for some guys, but not good for other guys. What it seems to do is sort of induce a slower distribution of the actual testosterone once the ester essentially gets cleaved off of it into your bloodstream, which thus, gets more steady effects. But for some guys, they're actually going to do better injecting intramuscularly, which sort of forces a faster uptake of the testosterone because the muscles themselves disperse the testosterone through your bloodstream in seemingly a more efficient way than injecting it subcutaneously. All right, so he's about to touch on an important thing related to hair loss and finasteride, so let's talk about that. Let's watch that.
Also, I started Finasteride to prevent any balding. The standard dose is 1 milligram per day. I split that into quarters, do 0.25 per day. But that blocks some of the conversion from testosterone to DHT. DHT, if it's high, it can accelerate that balding. And that, as a result, I think also boosted the test levels a bit. And if we look at my physique now versus at my absolute peak, granted the lighting might be a bit better there, I would say it appears I've lost potentially a little size. Maybe you can see a little bit in like the chest and the delts. Now, to be fair, I've also lost a little bit of weight.
Okay, so let's couch it right there. Yeah, definitely he lost a little bit of size there, and that, again, that has to do with the dose. I mean, the higher testosterone you're going to go, the more mass you're going to be able to put on, which I'll get to in a second. But I want to touch on an important part of what he just said. David went on Finasteride. Okay, Finasteride is a DHT blocker that predominantly works in the scalp, possibly blocking DHT elsewhere. I believe it's doing that through 5-alpha reductase inhibition. And that's because, look, I mean, high levels of testosterone and the subsequent conversion to what may be high levels of DHT does affect male pattern baldness and has at least the ability to accelerate that process. Like for somebody predisposed to being bald early in your life, going on TRT may accelerate that process. And that's through a DHT DHT, as well as an estradiol, as well as a hormone fluctuation, even as well as a prolactin, mediated mechanisms. All those things actually play a role. It's not as simple as DHT, but DHT is a large part of it. Now, the issue with this is, look, he goes on to say that for some men, as long as their androgen numbers are maintenance, they're at high levels, then some of the negative side effects that come along with finasteride or other hair growth or the prevention of hair loss drugs that one can take, like sexual side effects like sexual muting and libido issues and erection quality issues, may not happen. But I guess I want to maybe put a warning out there for folks. Being a consultant on sexual function, sexual dysfunction, all things biohacking, I wouldn't call it often, but I have gotten clients that have used finasteride, to prevent hair loss from TRT, or just because they were trying to regrow their hair and they weren't on TRT, but that ended up with severe sexual side effects as a result. And it's actually a known syndrome, a named syndrome called post-finasteride syndrome. And I've gotten clients that have come in that I've had to pull them out of that syndrome, and it took a lot of hardcore hormonal work predominantly to get that resolved, also a ceasing of the finasteride. Be warned, it's not as easy as, this will make you regrow your hair. It actually has the ability to induce some pretty terrible sexual side effects for some men. Certainly not all men. There's a lot of men, including David, that get away with taking finasteride. I mean, there's tons of them out there. But for us, just like SSRIs, for a certain subset of the population, predominantly those who aren't very aggressively managing androgens, there can be sexual side effects with finasteride. All right, so let's continue.
During that time, but my body seemed to want to hold more muscle mass at the higher dose. And maybe it was more my free T level than the actual dose. Because if we look at what my free T was during, that peak physique time, was always kind of between 200 to 300. And now for the past year, it's dropped down below 200. Also, it's important to mention that I stopped taking HCG over the past year, which is supposed to, maintain testicular function. Again, my balls haven't shrinked up, but that also boosts test levels. So I think I dropped that out, not realizing that I would have to raise my test dose to compensate for that. And because of that, not just the muscle mass, but also I haven't noticed as much of the other benefits either lately. I've made the decision to increase my dose.
All right, so a couple things to talk about there. So yeah, I mean, basically David makes the point that the higher the dose of TRT, and which again really translates to the higher the amount of total and circulating testosterone that you've got in your body, the more mass you're going to put on. And again, that is predominantly related to the increase in muscle protein synthesis. As well as, look, the higher levels of testosterone that you go, the more your body is going to be inclined to store your excess calories as mass and help you retain lean mass versus, store it as extra fat. So, I mean, the bottom line is the higher levels of testosterone you have, and I don't even really, certainly there's a max, but you can go as high as you want to go if you're okay with dealing with the side effects, the more mass you're going to get on. I mean, that's why people go on essentially testosterone cycles. Once you get above 200 milligrams, you're kind of pushing cycle territory, almost like an anabolic androgenic steroid. I mean, testosterone ultimately is a steroid. And I actually experienced that when I was dosing HCG. So when I took my total testosterone to 1200, free testosterone right at the top of the reference range, yeah, I put on mass a lot easier. In fact, again, some people thought I was on TRT back then, but it was HCG. It's just high levels of testosterone that have the ability to do that. So since that time, though, I've actually lost a very little bit of mass, somewhat of a noticeable bit of mass from when I was peaking at 1250. But again, as I explained in the video where I explained that, 1250 gave me, some pretty severe side effects. I just do not feel good and feel comfortable at 1250 total test. And I'll explain why that is here in a second. Now, there's one last thing which we won't show in the video that David says, and he goes, if I could go back in time, I maybe wouldn't have gone on TRT. And the reason that he says this is because throughout the period of taking testosterone, he's had to make all of these adjustments in dose. When he took the HCG out, he had to compensate for that via raising the TRT dose. And look, I want to say this is both true and not necessarily applicable to every guy. I mean, look, plenty of men find their ideal sweet spot of testosterone and they stay there for 10 years. Libido is great, erection quality is great, their strength is good, they're happy with their energy, but the numbers also check out. Total T's in a healthy place, free T's in a great place, prolactin is in a good place, they're managing estradiol, that's in a great place, hematocrit doesn't rise, none of these other weird biomarkers that potentially could get skewed with too high levels of testosterone are in any, dangerous place. It's just kind of how it is for some guys. But look, there is a case where people do have to adjust their doses based on their goals. So people adjust their frequency based on some of their goals or deficiencies or side effects. I mean, usually it has to do with manipulating estrogen and potentially even, getting a more stable level of testosterone. And in some cases, people want to experiment with like, well, how can I go? Like, how much muscle can I build? How much stronger can my libido be? Can I have more energy at the gym? And so people end up, bumping their doses up, and they may get completely positive effects, at which point maybe they should stay at that dose, or they may have some positives and then some side effects as well. What this actually tells us is that, TRT is like this shiny object. It's this great thing. I mean, there's a lot of potential benefits that you can get from going on TRT, but it actually does highlight like some of the drawbacks of TRT. It does show us that, TRT, just like any other biohacking endeavor, sometimes does require somewhat of a frequent tinkering, which I believe is good. I mean, look, the only way that you're going to be able to learn exactly how to strategically use testosterone and dial in your dose is to kind of make these adjustments, right? It's to go through these motions. Maybe even have it be the case that you end up on the wrong dose and it causes some sort of side effect, so that you can go through the motions and become seasoned in dose modification. So like TRT is not just like necessarily something you just get, you start injecting at a certain dose and like you ride off into the sunset. You may have to make otherwise hormonal adjustments. I mean, for some men, they're going to need to go on anastrozole or an otherwise aromatase inhibitor to control testosterone's conversion to estradiol or estrogen. Some people are going to go on TRT initially without the intention of having kids in the next year, but then meet the love of their lives and then want to become extremely fertile, at which point they're going to go on HCG, gonadorelin, Clomid, or something else. At which point, kind of the dose is going to change. The protocol will have to be adjusted at that point. But again, look, if you're going to go on TRT, and for a lot of men, not all men, because you can go on TRT and then just Clomid off of it. You could PCT off of it and get your gonadotropins functioning again and get your own natural test firing again. But some guys are going to be on it forever, right? So if you are going to be on it forever, you're going to want to become a specialist in dose modification, dose frequency, managing estrogen, and all of these other details. All right, so thank you to David De Las Morenas for making that video. It kind of prompted me to do a video here on this channel to further educate my audience on the matter. David, I've been watching your stuff for a while. Love your channel. Keep up the good work, brother. And if you guys want to follow David's channel, look, again, the guy does pretty epic content where he's sort of like filming himself on the go. It's actually very divergent from your typical kind of YouTuber that may be in a podcast setting or whatever. You can follow David at his channel, which is called How to Beast. All right, everyone. I hope that's been educational. Thank you so much for watching. As I explained earlier, the couple products that are supporting this broadcast that have kept us alive, but they're epic nootropic products. They are the following. Number one, the Cortex Stack. I mean, this is motivation, mental energy, verbal fluency, in a couple pills. On the market for just about 9 years. It's a very powerful nootropic stack if you want that dopamine-centered energy. You can buy Cortex right now. Description of this video or at livecortex.com, our website. There's a 2-day shipping option, so you can literally have it to your doorstep in 2 or 3 days. Secondarily, if you want 6 to 8 hours of clean stimulant energy, that's what I built Torque for. It was a nootropic stack that I was basically taking myself before I realized this should be a commercial stack. Focus. There you go. If you don't have a bottle of Torque next to you at your workstation, you're definitely missing out. When I take it, 25 minutes later, I have this profoundly noticeable increase in mental energy, motivation, drive. I'm even more verbally fluent. I just feel more like a beast, like I want to tackle the day and get stuff done. If I'm ever in a slump, a cognitive slump where I've got brain fog and I don't have energy, Torque usually clears it up. But on top of that, it makes you feel very, very functional. It's a noticeable stimulant nootropic stack that you're not going to be like, is this working or not? You're going to know Torque's working. You can get it at livecortex.com or in the description of this video. Go buy a bottle now. Lastly, if you need my help, I am a coach or a consultant on biohacking. I have a lot of specialties ranging from nootropics to TRT to testosterone in general to analyzing or interpreting your blood work. Look, if you need help in all these areas, I'll flash my expertise in front of you for a second. Have a look. And you can hire me in under a minute at livecortex.com. All right, friends, pleasure being with you. So much more content to come soon. I lastly wanted to mention I'll be doing a podcast with Vigorous Steve this Friday, okay? So I'm going to be on Vigorous Steve's podcast this Friday, which is going to be explosive. So much that we're going to talk about. That thing is going to be super educational for folks. I'll have a couple clips Friday or Saturday timeframe to be able to upload here to this channel, and then the live podcast is going to be on Vigorous Steve's channel like Sunday or Monday. So look forward to that. Gonna be epic. All right. Hope you guys have a great day. I'll talk to you on the next one.